morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Freethought Hour. Now, I've had some wonderful guests over. I've done about 100 of these now. I've lost count and I've forgotten the names of most of the people I've interviewed. But tonight, I have a fantastic guest. I'm very pleased that we've connected to South Africa, which I think we've only done once before. And I have a lovely lady who is a teacher of critical thinking. Hello, Tersia. How the devil are you?
I am very well, thank you. And how the devil are you? Am I allowed to say that?
Yes. Well, that's supposed to be my catchphrase, but you're welcome to borrow it. So, hello, Bola Lang. Welcome. Thank you for watching us. And yeah. So, South Africa, it's a different sort of setup from the UK, isn't it? Because you've got a history of mixed ethnicities. And I believe that from your name, you are actually a Huguenot. How did that happen?
Religion. It's all about religion, because my ancestors came as refugees from France in the time of Cardinal Richelieu, when they were gross human rights violations, we'd call them today, if not war crimes and maybe genocide. I wouldn't know about ethnic cleansing. And a lot of French Protestants who were called Huguenots fled to, amongst other places, South Africa, which had been settled by the Dutch 100 years before those events. And that's where my ancestry dates back to. So that is why my surname is du Plessis, although it's my married surname. In my both father and mother side, they were also Huguenot ancestors. So it runs deep.
You obviously have an interesting story to tell, and that's what we'd like to hear. So, Tersia, now's your chance. Please tell us how you got to be the person you are today.
I will try to keep it short because I carried away. So, firstly, an egg and a sperm once came together.
I know you were born at a very early age. Yes.
Absolutely. I was very young. I grew up in rural KwaZulu-Natal, in a small town called Freethought. I spent my entire life basically, because I was 5 when we relocated there, and I left there when I was 17. Spent my formative years as part of a very loving, very religious family, very conservative Afrikaans community during the heyday of the apartheid years. Well, no, I suppose not during the heyday. I think in the 80s, 90s, when I was in high school, the walls were beginning to come down. In fact, it was on the 6th February 1990, which was in my matric year, that F.W. de Klerk made his speech where Nelson Mandela was released soon after that, and the ANC was unbanned. Then I went overseas to Greece for a year, where I worked as an au pair. And maybe it was swimming naked in the Mediterranean Sea that was the first indication that I wouldn't turn out to be a normal Calvinist Afrikaanse meisie. So maybe that had something to do with it. Then I followed the traditional route. I went to study. I became a teacher, got married to a very good Afrikaans Calvinist Dutch Reformed gentleman, had babies, did all the motherly things. And then I started to read the Bible when I became involved with what I saw as a corrupt school governing body in the town where we used to live at that time. And the fact that here were people who called themselves Christians, and I also called myself a Christian, but we saw the world so totally differently. And that made me question who was right. Was I wrong? Maybe I was the one who was wrong. And then I became an atheist about 10 years ago. And of course, being exposed and being fortunate enough to have access to the internet, the world opened up to me. And as a teacher of English literature, I discovered critical thinking skills and philosophy, which I'd always had an affinity for, but it was never a very prominent aspect of my life, though I was a keen reader. I love history, and I've always loved history. But that I think that is the shortest way of saying how I became the person that I am. And there might be those who listen who differ, but I think that's the shortest way of putting it.
Okay, right, fair enough. So you left out a lot there, but I'm wondering whether you're having escaped from Christianity, become an atheist. Was that an easy journey for you, or did you find you had to sort of struggle to escape? Because, of course, you're still in a society which is largely Christian. So I don't know, were you shunned?
No, I wasn't shunned. Shunning is not something that's really directly done in the denomination that I was part of. So, no, I wasn't shunned. I was never, to this day, I don't think that I am shunned. I don't think atheists as such in the normal going of South African society are shunned per se. That's a very strong word. What I would say, though, is that many people that I have contact with fear, if not explicit, then at least some sort of implicit discrimination, especially in certain communities. For example, if you're a teacher and you want to get a post at a government school, I would advise you not to be an open atheist. Yes, just rather don't,
So not completely in the closet, but just mind where you reveal that you're out, as it were.
Yes. Definitely. And when you ask whether it is difficult, that's not such a straightforward question to answer, because for me personally, it was actually quite easy. But that's because of my personality profile. So once I've looked at the evidence of for anything, and I've evaluated the facts that I have at hand, then I make a decision. And once I've made that decision, I go with it.
Yes.
Because I don't think that we have as much control over anything as we think or would like to think in any ways. So I look at the facts, I make my judgment calls, and then with the best intentions, and then I just go with it. And once I came to the realization that the Bible wasn't true, and I didn't think there was a God, I had this one moment, one evening, I was lying in the bath. Now, in Worcester, it's a winter rainfall area, so we don't get thunderstorms. On the Highveld, where I grew up, you'd have these terrific thunderstorms with lightning flashes, and they're quite regularly. And this one particular evening, I had just finished reading Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion.
Yes.
That I think was the final nail in the coffin. And I was lying in bath, and it was warm, so the windows were open, and there arose a thunderstorm, which is in Worcester, it's really rare. It's an omen. Very rare. Well, you never know. One never knows. So I remember lying in the bathroom in the upstairs room and saying out loud, right, this is my moment.
Yeah.
God, if you exist, if there is a God, and if you exist, I'm now going to say out loud, there is no God. And please, just if there's a loud thunderclap right now, then I will consider that maybe I'm wrong, And there was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. But I might, you know what? I must tell you this. This is really actually funny. Well, I don't know. It depends. Let's see what your audience makes of it. Yes. This year, on my 49th birthday, I invited a whole bunch of godless heathen to come over. And that's on the 25th of January. And it was a very, very hot, warm, muggy day. And a thunderstorm developed, such as we have not seen in the Boerland for decades. Two bushfires were started because lightning struck the veld. And to to top it off, we used to live in another part of town, and the house of my neighbor, whom I used to live next door to, her house was hit by lightning, caught on fire, and the roof burnt down.
Whoa.
So we were thinking, maybe there's some sort of problem with the GPS and there's some sort of delayed communications. Maybe, we were speculating about that. So maybe I just need to keep my mouth shut a little bit.
Well, for the benefit of our audience, I'd like to say that invoking God to produce a thunderclap to demonstrate he's real is not a good way of seeking information. You are literally in the lap of the gods when you do that.
Well, maybe it will convince your Christian viewers that I was so sincere about getting some sort of answer that I would go that far, which is something I would normally never do in the course of my daily life. Not even as a Christian would you ask for signs like that, because it's irrational. So
exactly.
if anybody asks me for proof how sincere I think I still am about getting some sort of answer, some sort of evidence of the existence of the God of the Bible, then how more desperate or how more sincere can you be if you're desperate enough to ask the Lord to to send a thunderclap at a particular moment?
Well, how far away are you from Cape Town?
1 hour.
Are you? Yeah, because I've got a friend in Cape Town. His name is Michael Smorenberg, and he's a novelist. And he's written some great stuff. He's been he was a guest on screen at a Skeptics in the Pub event some years ago. And he's given me a copy of one of his books, which is called A Trojan Affair. And the interesting thing about that, because you mentioned the svelte, it refers to you have a new multi-telescope
array, the telescope array.
Thank you. Thank you for helping me out. My brain was shocked with the attempt to remember that expression. But I really recommend his story. Somebody is trying to get enough funds to make a film out of it, which would be really good.
That would be good. Yeah, that's quite far away. That's in the Karoo,
yes,
which is at Sutherland, which is actually one of the coldest places. It gets very cold, very dry, yes, quite high, and very clear skies, obviously, as well.
Yeah. So when it starts running, I don't think it's finished yet, but it's going to be linked to other telescope arrays around the world, so that it actually behaves as if the entire planet is one. The computers mash them all together to make a telescope as big as the diameter of the planet. So that'll be interesting. Anyway, critical thinking. That's what you're into now, isn't it?
That is what I'm into. That is what I'm trying to achieve in the community in which I live. So I'm a teacher, but I'm not currently employed at a school. And I tutor from home. So COVID necessitated me taking my youngest son out of school. And before I knew it, I had 7 other kids that I was tutoring. And we are continuing that. But that's not the reason that I'm not teaching full time in a public school. I don't think I could go back to teaching in a public school because the curriculum is so focused on getting a lot of knowledge into children's heads without teaching them how to think. And the era in which we live, we don't need to memorize and learn a whole bunch of facts, because we can access facts at the drop of a button. We have a library of facts in our back pockets, and we don't need to be taught facts. We need to be inspired to be curious about the world we live in so that we can access facts and do something with those facts. And I'm not convinced that that is happening in most public schools, especially not in South Africa. And I'm also not convinced that it can happen when you have 30 kids, or well, in South Africa, if you have 30 kids in a school, in a classroom, you are very lucky. There are, in fact, I belong to a Facebook group that represents 40,000 South African teachers, and most of them sit with class sizes of 50 to 80.
Wow.
So,
yes. Well,
I mean, there is, you can't impart any knowledge in those circumstances.
No.
And you cannot inspire people to learn.
Absolutely.
And, critical thinking skills to me is about attitude.
Yes.
So I start,
You're so right.
That's where it begins. It begins with an attitude. So I started this nonprofit organization in 2019 with the aim of raising money so that I can go to schools, particularly those schools where you have 50, 60, 70, 15-year-olds sitting in a classroom, and do small group training where you basically just awaken their minds.
Yes.
To me, that is what critical thinking skills is about. And it's about the attitude of saying, why is this thing like this?
Yes. Well, I so agree with almost everything you've said there, because for some strange reason, I suppose historically this was appropriate, but for some strange reason today, teaching assessment is focused on attainment. That's, whether they can regurgitate what you've taught them, or effort, whether they've, tried hard to produce a long essay or whatever. And it doesn't consider attainment at all. It doesn't consider attitude. That's the word I wanted. Attitude at all. And yet that is the most important thing. What you need is a class full of people who are engaged willingly in the process of their education. And the chances of getting that in a class of 50 or even 30 is remote, because there's going to be somebody there who's not a willing student, and they're going to disrupt and spoil the lesson. So I was talking to my daughter, my eldest daughter, because before we went live, we were talking about daughters and sons and things. And my eldest daughter is 14. She was lucky in that recently so many children were away from school because of COVID that she had a class of 12. And it was entirely different for her, because it turned into a discussion with the teacher as equals. I said, what you've got there is a seminar. In university terms, that would be called a seminar. And that's the proper way, the best way to do education. Because
I can't,
everybody's engaged.
That's it. You see, so in my hypothesis is that it's actually very easy to teach a child critical thinking skills, because I think that is our natural inclination.
Yes.
And then we send them to school, and then school trains them to become regurgitators, copiers, conformists, or rebels.
Yes.
So there's no cultivation of that innate human curiosity.
No.
And it's not a criticism of schools and teachers that I'm making here. It's a system.
Yes.
Because you cannot engage natural curiosity when you have 14-year-olds in a classroom, because
and
there are
targets,
so many interesting things.
Yes, and you've got targets to hit. They've got to get that standard in this exam in the next few months. So it's cramming. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So you're so right in this. And what was the other thing I was going to say?
We were talking about attitude. Now,
I just wanted to say that the system that we're criticizing here originated in Victorian England when the education sort of began, and the intention was to make mill workers, people who could be suitable to be employed in a factory or in a shop. And so they needed to be taught how to read and write and add up, because that's the things they needed just to be a member of society. And that could be taught more or less by rote. They weren't taught to be investigators.
No, and that's why if one looks back into history, if you look at the Industrial Revolution, if you look at the movers and shakers, almost all of them were self-taught.
Yes.
They were self-taught, or they were wealthy and they had a tutor and they were taught at home.
Exactly.
And it worked very well, and it was essential in that society. But, as always happens with humans, you just have to read Sapiens. We tend to outpace ourselves. So, and the faster things change, the more we outpace ourselves. Just like our technology has outpaced our evolutionary minds, just so our current world has outpaced the systems that we've put in place to live in that world.
Yes.
It's the same goes, I think, for healthcare, for mental healthcare, for education, dealing with how we operate in the world. We've outpaced ourselves once again, and sometime sooner or later it's going to. In Afrikaans we have the. I don't know if you know what Afrikaans sounds like. It's this guttural. So that's my mother tongue is Afrikaans, and we have this expression. It translated, it means it will come back to bite you in the butt. But in Afrikaans, dit sal terugkom om jou in die gat te byt,
Yes.
That's exactly what's happening now. And the more social problems we have, it seems the less able we are to equip young people and people to deal with it. And the more tightly we hang on to these systems that we've created that used to work for 50 or 60 years, but because of things we did ourselves, it no longer works.
Well, I think due to the internet that we're probably on the cusp of some sort of educational revolution. At the moment, schools don't really know how to cope with the internet, because they tend to think of a mobile device as a distraction, ruining the lesson, because I'm here, I want to deliver my lesson, and you've got your phone out, Whereas what we should really be doing is saying, you can Google that, go to it now,
Yes. And we are perpetuating that in so many ways. When I was in 2016, I was a substitute English teacher for 2 terms, and one of the criticisms against me was that so this is so weird. I told the grade 8s, I told all the kids that I was teaching, I said, please go home, and if you don't have internet at home, I'll help you, and download a dictionary onto your phone.
Yes.
And but the funny thing was, what I found really dismaying, but it's our fault. It's our fault again, because the kids said to me, why must I use my money, my data to download a dictionary? I mean, that's a school thing. The school has to give me the dictionary and the data to download the dictionary. I'm not going to use my money for a dictionary. But that's the way the system has made them think, because they see themselves. The system makes the child or the learner passive. And they've begun to see themselves as passive. So
Yes.
you have to sit there, and the teacher has to put some things in your head, and
Yes.
you have to take that, and at
Yeah.
the right time, you have to give that back to the teacher.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
kids do that really well. They
Mm.
go to prize evening, and they're the top performers, and
Mm.
everybody likes them, and they're happy. And those who aren't like that,
Mm.
in fact, they want to rebel against being passive. But the
Mm.
only way they know how to rebel is to then be disrespectful
Disruptive.
and to be disruptive. Yes.
Yes. Mm. Well, I want to jump in here because some years ago, I invented and patented and got manufactured some tools to help children learn to read and write, and to tell the time on the analog clock face, which of course is history now. Nobody needs to use that anymore. But we sold these at education shows, which are attended by teachers. We tried to sell them at more general shows where parents were attending. And it was very difficult because if you spoke to the parents, they would say, "That's the job of the school. I don't need to spend my money on that. Come on, Johnny, let's go and buy some candy." And that was the relative value that they saw to our gadgets that help children learn to read and write.
And you see, everybody talks about empowerment, especially in South Africa, having the legacy of so many years, decades, centuries of exploitation by industrialists. I think most of it was the scramble for Africa. It was about resources. That what it was primarily about.
Yes.
And so now the empowerment is this buzzword. But how do you empower somebody if you make them passive about the thing that matters to them most, which is their education?
Yeah.
So
what they've tried to do is make them into compliant employees. That's what they've tried to do.
Yes. But at the same time, they complain when they're not problem solvers and not and not creative enough, and they don't take responsibility. But it's because you empower somebody when you teach them about who they are and when you awaken their passions inside of them.
Yes.
And that is how you empower somebody. And that's what people think when I say that I teach critical thinking skills, that they think it's about logic and it's about philosophy, which it is, which is the bedrock of it. But when I work with learners from the local township, of whom most live in 1 by 2.5 meters shacks and have to walk 500 meters in the dark to go to a pit latrine,
Yes.
I begin to teach those kids about logic. I will lose them completely. I need to first awaken them to their own mind.
Get them to question things. Yes. Can I jump? I want to jump in again here because I was in not Pretoria, Johannesburg some years ago, and we were shown these 1.5 square meter shacks that were provided in, I think, the Soweto area. Yes. And we were taken around. Our tour guide, who had a minibus to drive us around, he said that the white South Africans couldn't understand because look what we've provided. They've got running water, they've got electricity, and they can buy a television, and so that's everything they're going to need. And then they went off and lived in their mansions. With a wall round it and a guard at the gate, and they couldn't understand why the ethnic locals were grieving, and they didn't see the disparity.
And the first thing I want to teach children, and that goes for the privileged kids, of whom there are many Black kids these days, but also the unprivileged and the underprivileged, is to not only question things outside of you, but also begin by questioning yourself. So when you feel disgruntled, when you feel angry, the first thing to do is ask yourself, all right, so why am I feeling this?
Yes.
Why
Yes.
am I feeling this? And,
Yes.
you know, we have a problem. South Africa is one of the most violent countries in the world. And I'm convinced that if we can just get people to before they act upon that instinct of anger, to say, I'm so angry now. Why
Yes.
am I so angry?
Yes.
And to almost take that emotion and begin to examine that emotion, question that emotion that you are experiencing before you even start asking about why did that person do that to me. Ask, why does what that person did affect me this way?
Yes. Yes.
To me, that's the beginning of critical thinking skills, because
Absolutely.
that goes into metacognition, where you start to think about your own thinking. And the
Yes.
moment you start thinking about your own thinking, if we talk in the context of education and learning, the moment you ask yourself about a maths problem, the moment you ask yourself, I'm not getting the right answer. Why did I not
Yes.
get the right answer? Is it because I had no idea what I was doing? I was just guessing? Or is it because I made a mistake in
Yes.
that step or that step?
Yes.
Or, and, you know, so often children will say, you'll give them a task and they'll say, I don't understand this question. And then I'll say, all right, so let's take it. Which word in that question is it? Is there any particular word? No,
Yes.
everything. I just don't understand anything.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You can't begin to help yourself if you don't begin to unpack what is it about this that I don't understand.
Yes.
Or even the question, do I understand? And what I do with the kids that I tutor, we did that on Friday. So I have my own son and then two of his friends. They're doing the IGCSE. We actually switched to the
Mm.
Cambridge curriculum at the beginning of this year.
That's a great
And
GCSE, by the way.
so can we ask you for help if we need it? Because I'm not a science teacher.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, well, I don't know how much time this is going to take up in my busy life, but send me your questions. I'll do what I can to help. I can point you in the right direction, even if I can't directly spend time helping
Well,
you. You know,
yeah.
I did a bit. There was a period in my life when I was a carer because my first wife got cancer and I had to look after her until she died, very sadly, too young. And during that time, I had to be at home. And this was in the very early days of the internet when I think we just got past the chirpy things that downloaded with a noise. What were they called?
Oh, a modem.
Yeah, the modem. That's it. Them things. Yes. But anyway, I was involved in an early online school, and so I had to prepare lessons that I could deliver on a primitive computer. It must have been I suppose it was in the early 90s.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and so I could put up images and bits of text and then ask them to type in a response. So it was sort of interactive in an early clunky sort of way. But that was the beginning of what has now turned into quite an online education industry. And I'll happily try to help you out if I can.
Well, so far they are coping quite well, and fortunately, funny enough, the subject that they struggle the most with is the English, because they're doing main language. Obviously, there's no second language option. Where if they were in public school, they would be, well, I don't know. I would encourage my son to do home language in any case, but even the home language would be different from what the Cambridge curriculum does. But what I did with them on Friday, I gave them each a subject. They have 6 subjects, and each of them they got a subject, and they had to do a lesson. They had to tell me and another what they had learned so far this.
I'm so glad you said that, because I've always maintained that the best way to really understand something, a subject, whatever the item is to teach it. Because
Yes,
then you have to know it inside and out and be ready to answer
absolutely.
questions that are related to it. And if you can do that, then you've learned it.
And you know what was so amazing is as they had to teach me, and they were doing computer science, physics, and chemistry. None of those are. I'm no expert. Well, no, that's putting it very mildly. I don't know. I know science history, which is quite valuable, I must say.
Yeah.
And I do try to sort of at least grasp it in a very rudimentary way. But I mean, I didn't even have science up to the level of grade 12 when I was at school. I was history and accounting and language. That's my thing. And so they were teaching me. And the one boy in particular, he did the computer science portion. And every now and again, he would sort of stand still and say, I don't think I really know this. And to come to that realization as a learner, student,
yes,
I don't think I really know this. Or at one time he said, I have an idea, but I don't really understand it.
Yes. Well,
and he looked at me and he said, I think I'll have to go back to this section of the work.
Yeah.
And I said, if I've achieved what, and now to me, that is the epitome of critical thinking.
Exactly.
Critical thinking is that moment when you say, I thought I understood this, but now I'm not so sure. And that's why I'm an atheist today. Because I was immersed in a religion. I sincerely believed it.
Yes.
And then something happened, or a series of events, fortunate, I believe, happened that made me say, I thought I knew this. It was so familiar. The Bible, it was basically the Bible.
Yes.
I mean, I was so familiar with Romans, and we did a very thorough catechism in the church that I used to attend, and I'm so familiar with the Bible. And I started reading it, and I had to say to myself, I thought I knew this, but I really don't.
Yeah.
And then I was lucky enough that I lived in the time of the internet, where I could then brush up on things that I'd forgotten. For example, the whole all the doctrines and the doctrinal history, because I was taught, but I'd forgotten, and that's why I don't believe that the idea of overlapping magisteria has any validity.
Yeah.
I honestly, I fail to see how one can be a critical thinker and a religious believer. And this is not that. I'm not saying that Christians are stupid. I'm not saying that that I'm smarter than anybody else, because I don't think that I'm particularly smart. I just cannot see that if you're honest, if you're an honest critical thinker, I cannot see how you can see the Bible as in any way trustworthy.
Absolutely. When you're looking at the doctrine critically, like you just described, it doesn't stand up. And so at that point, you're forced to try and put it in a separate compartment in your brain, this non-overlapping magisteria, which was an idea of, I think, Stephen Jay Gould.
Yes, that's right.
And I just can't understand that. I mean, how can you? There are scientists like that. How can you, in your laboratory, be doing all the scientific things that are based on observation and, multiple examples of getting the same result endlessly? How can you then walk out of that room into your church and put on this, I love this fantasy sort of hat? It doesn't fit together in your head.
And I have to say that people often say that atheists like me pick on Christianity, but I suppose the same could be said of Islam. Judaism is a different beast altogether. So, in my opinion, the Jews and Judaism is very interesting, but I'm not clear enough. But I can see how somebody can be a Jew and even a practicing Jew and be an atheist. I can absolutely, I can see that. But I cannot.
They might call themselves secular Jews rather than atheist Jews.
They might, yes.
But you're right. It's an interesting mixture of an ethnicity and a religion, because you're Jewish by birth, has come down through your mother, and you don't really have to practice anything, but you're still Jewish.
Yes. But you're still Jewish, yeah. But in the case of Islam and Christianity, I cannot see how you can be an honest, integrated person, see yourself as somebody who thinks critically and believe in the deities described by the Bible and the Quran.
No.
I can see somebody being a deist. I can see somebody like Einstein living at the time that he did, believing that there's some greater being, some force. You know, the closest that I could come to being religious, if one wants to use that word, is this whole idea of dark matter. That is still this in physics. I mean, it's one of the mysteries in physics.
Exactly. It's still a mystery. Yes,
it's a mystery.
It's not a fact.
Exactly. So I can see that I could bring myself to say maybe that's where something is.
Yeah. Well, Einstein had this. He called it Spinoza's God, because Spinoza, I'm not very good on his history, but he came up with this deism idea in which Mother Nature itself is your deity, and you can sort of worship the wonder of reality.
But to me, that also, why would a deity? Why do deities need worship?
Well, yes. Well,
that you know. That's something that boggles my mind about religion and religious ideas. You know,
in the case of the Mother Nature deity, there's nothing there to need worship, but I think it's more feeling of awe, rather than submission. It's just amazement.
So maybe the name we give to that feeling of awe is worship. And I can go with that. I'm 100. You know, I get a sense of awe every day. You should go onto my Facebook page and look at my photos of where I live. You know, when I walk out of the mall, it's these mountains, and I've been living here for 10 years.
Yes.
And I kid you not a day goes past that I do not, in summer, autumn, winter. In the winter, they're covered in snow. In summer, they're dry and bare. Yes. Not a day goes past that I do not feel that sense and experience of awe when I look at just where I live. And but
can you see that amazing flat-topped one?
Table Mountain? No, not from where I live. No, but I think ours are nicer. I'll send you a photo. Our mountains are nicer than. The flat one, it's iconic, but the Western mountains are nicer.
Okay, right. You're loyal to your local mountains. That's good.
Well, Table Mountain is, but it is beautiful. I mean, it's this icon. It's this iconic thing. Yeah. I just want to get back to that idea of worship and the Christian God. So, this idea of a being, a greater force. May the force be with you, something like that.
Well, that was a couple of days ago. May the 4th.
Yes, it was. May the 4th. Exactly. I can get behind that, I can understand. I can understand that because it's an emotional thing, it's a feeling. But the idea that there's this personal God that is described in Christianity and Islam by those two books, there's absolutely no way. No. Firstly, that I see any evidence for such a being. And secondly, that such a being is either moral, rational, or good. I used to be very sincere in my praise of God, although I have to say, the denomination that I grew up in is the Calvinist, so it's it tends to be austere, and we tend to be very rational in the way we practice our belief. In fact, we're a little bit nervous and scared of showing emotion in the context of our religion. You know, you don't raise your hands. It's and the buildings are austere, and I credit my deconversion to a great extent to the fact that we had this rational approach to what we believed, and even as a believer, so worship and praise was something you sort of did in private.
It's very non-emotional, almost stolid, and completely the opposite of the evangelicals. And
completely, yes.
All their hands up stuff.
And even then, when one of the questions that I asked myself was, or actually my husband prompted this question. Why does God so desperately need to be worshipped? And I thought about it as a mother. You know, when your kids are, when my kids were when they're little, you have their life in the palm of your hand. You decide what they do, when they do it, how they do it, and they are at your mercy in many ways. And I never wanted my kids to worship me.
No.
I still don't. I never felt that they had to thank me for every meal I gave them.
Well, that's right.
I did it because I love them. Why does God constantly want us to say thank you?
Well,
please.
I've got some comments to make here too, because I think you're obviously a liberal parent, not a control freak parent, which tends to go with the more traditional attitudes. And I agree with our audience member here, Bolalang. I apologize if I can't pronounce your name right.
Shall I teach you, John?
Pardon?
I know Bolalang. It's Sutu. It's Bolalang.
Bolalang. Oh, I'll try my best. Thank you. Yes. Anyway, what he says was, it's people who want to worship, and I think he's right, because it comes from being in a household with an oppressive adult, father or mother, who demands, following in whatever way, and so there's you are raised with a sort of instill of submission, and so you think that's a normal condition, and you want it thereafter for the rest of your life. You want there to be some superior being that you submit to. What about that?
That is so interesting, and that leads nicely into something else that to me also ties into critical thinking skills, if I can loop back to my pet project, and that is the whole idea of understanding human nature and who we are as humans. And I think we know more about space, a little bit less about the deep oceans, and then I think we know very little about ourselves as a species in terms of what happens in our minds and how our brains work. And a riddle on par with dark matter is the riddle of consciousness, which is one of my fascinations. I could just I don't know if I did ask you whether you're familiar with Professor Mark Solom's and his work on consciousness.
No,
he might be an interesting guest if you could get hold of him.
I'd love to, yes, because consciousness is a wonderful mystery that does need investigating. Yes.
And if we so this is not to do with consciousness so much, but the whole thing about humans want to worship, and how different personalities are more inclined to deconvert. This has been proven.
Oh, yes.
It's not about intelligence so much. It's about a type of personality.
Yes.
And
yes.
something that I used to listen to a podcast, Reasonable Doubts. They don't produce anymore. But they were excellent, and I must find the episode. But there was one episode where the one member of the party was Dr. Luke Galen. He's a social psychologist, and he referred to research about religious versus non-religious people. And one of the aspects that they looked at was which of the two groups was more comfortable with change.
Yes.
And they found that people who are comfortable with change, in fact, some people are not only not comfortable with change, they crave it.
Yes.
They need change. That those people tend to deconvert and feel more comfortable being non-religious.
Yes, they're the explorers, aren't they? That go out and seek excitement, yes, and interest.
That's it. And it's very interesting. If this is anecdotal, I mean, this is not by no means scientific what I'm saying now, but in my family, if I talk about my extended family, so we are 4 children, and then I have many cousins, and of the 14 cousins, I was the first one to go overseas. I was 17. I was 17 when I got into a plane in 1991 and went to Greece. And as far as I know, I'm the only one who's at least open atheist. Most of them are very religious still.
Yes.
And it's not a value judgment I'm making here. There's a personality profile where some people, because of their personality, they feel more comfortable with not knowing.
Yes.
And they feel more comfortable with change.
Well, I don't know whether it's comfortable with not knowing. I think they feel more comfortable with close horizons, so that they do know within their vicinity. So that they're the stay-at-homes who like the church because that's familiar.
It's the familiarity, and the sense of security that it gives me. And
you know, I want to put in here that for a start, I want to mention when I'm engaged in chatting to religious people, one of the first things I want to do is slightly poke fun at them, because they say they've got this doctrine and they think God has asserted this and it must be true. And I say, Uncle.
Come again?
I thought you'd know, because Uncle.
No, I don't.
That's the Zulu god.
Oh, Nkulu.
Yes, okay, yeah. My pronunciation again. Sorry. How do you say it?
Nkulu.
Yes, that's the Zulu deity. And what I'm trying to point out to them is they think they've got the only God and he's the right one. So I'm just throwing this other God into the conversation to confound them. Unkulu. Yes. Thank you. Yes. The other thing that I wanted to say.
Do you know what? Yeah, I have to be a pedantic now. Nkulunkulu is actually the Zulu name for God. It means the big man, the biggest of the big men, the big man, Nkulunkulu. And you know, now that you speak about the Zulu deity, I wonder if the Zulus actually had a deity before they were changed, because the Zulus do engage in ancestor worship.
Yes. Well, I've seen pictures of Nkulunkulu, and he's a snake-headed, I believe, a snake-headed god. or maybe
Well,
not.
now
That could be
now I have to check up on that because
yes.
I know that
I could easily be wrong.
let me just see. I do know that, I mean, obviously there's this. Okay, I will not tell you what oh, Google is so interesting, don't you?
Now you've said that, I want to mention that one of our MPs had to resign recently because he Googled Dominator, which is the name of a brand of tractor. He's a farmer and he was looking for a new tractor. And of course, what came up was entirely unexpected. But he was observed looking at porn by a female colleague in the House of Commons, and it caused such a furore he had to resign.
And he had to resign?
Yes.
Couldn't he say that it was not his fault? Can he not blame
he
Google?
tried that. He said it was a mistake because he was searching for a tractor, but unfortunately he did it again.
So he actually became interested. Can you blame them? I mean, shame.
You
Dear.
You can't get away with saying it's a mistake twice.
No.
The other thing I wanted to raise in this conversation is, after many years of being a teacher, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of people don't like being told. So what we should really be doing is, as the word education actually means, if you go back to the etymology of it, we should be leading them to find out for themselves.
Yes. And the funny thing is that there Bolalang is saying Mveling Gangi is the Zulu deity. So he's an expert. He should know. You should get Bolalang to tell us about the African traditional religions, because we don't know much about that. But just to get back to that thing about leading, I follow an educator that has a critical thinking podcast. It's called Hedagogy. And he just did an episode about super courses where you actually use problem-based learning. And I think problem-based learning is a way to try and lead somebody. So you have to get them engaged in something.
Yes.
And that brings us back to that whole thing of you have to get them engaged, because if you get somebody curious about something, with the age in which we live, get them curious about something, get them to want to know the answer.
Yes.
And in that journey of accessing the information and finding the answer, you lead them along the way. And then your role as an educator is to literally facilitate. So what I like to do, and once again, you can only do this in small groups. I say to the kids, okay, so what if you want to know about guns, one of the girls that I teach is a very good shot. She's does shooting as a hobby.
Yes.
And so I'd say to her, why is that your favorite gun? Do you know what the bullets are made of? Do you know what the charge is?
Yes.
Do you know how long? What's the history of guns?
Yes.
And then she started to do research on her own. Something she understands. And along the way, she started to read about history. She did physics came into it, mathematics came into it. Words like velocity, words like
you stimulated a process of finding out. Yes,
exactly.
I want to mention, because we've got a viewer here tonight who's called Dean Kruger. Hello, Dean. Thank you for your little joke. I like that. I don't know where you are. I don't know where you are, Dean, but you remind me of a couple of researchers. There was a Kruger and a Mr. Dunning, the Dunning-Kruger combo.
Oh, Dean is my friend from the Atheist Republic, Cape Town.
Right.
So
Yes.
yeah, he's cheering for me. Thanks, Dean.
Well, so Mr. Dunning and Mr. Kruger, of course, came up with the idea that there's a level of stupidity below which you don't know how stupid you are. You've got no way of realizing it.
Yes.
I don't know whether Dean's related to that, Kruger.
I don't think so. No, he's an Afrikaans. He's a South Afrikaanse Kruger. He's probably more likely related to the great man Paul Kruger himself. But
Yes,
that thing about the Dunning Kruger. I'd be careful to say that you're so stupid that you don't know what you don't know. I have read about some papers about the Dunning-Kruger and how it's often misquoted and misunderstood. So I don't want to perpetrate, that crime myself. But definitely,
I was rather denigrated. I shouldn't have been.
So I always tell the kids that I teach, the less you know, the less you know. And
yes.
It sounds like it's tautology, but when you start, you mean, and the more
the less you know, you know.
That's it, and
yes.
That brings me to the other aspect of critical thinking skills, which is epistemology. So,
yes,
one of that thing about not knowing what you don't know ties into knowing how we know. The other day, one of the girls that I teach came to this class and she had this terrible stuffy nose and she wasn't feeling well. And I said to her, "Oh, did you pick up a cold? I hope it's not COVID, blah, blah, blah." And she said, "No, she has a stuffy nose because she went to bed the previous night with her hair wet." That was that was her wear. So, and I said to her, "Well, that is now really interesting." And just to get back to the system that we teach with, that's not working. This I immediately recognized as a perfect teaching moment, because here's this girl making a claim. She's making a claim.
Yes. She's associated. She's associated an effect with correlated it with a possible cause, but of course that doesn't mean it is a cause.
So my nose is stuffy because I didn't dry my hair last night and I went to sleep with my hair wet. And I said to her, "Well, that's interesting. So let's explore this." And we spent the next 2 hours exploring whether that was a valid claim, and not only whether it was a valid claim, but also we went through the process of what could we do to determine whether it's a valid claim or not. So if you look at all the concepts that we discussed in that time, she learned about criteria. We learned about cause and effect. We learned about correlation and causation. Total concepts in logic and critical thinking. And we did all of that by talking about stuffy nose and a wet head.
Yes, any opportunity, grasp it. Yes, absolutely. Tersia, I could talk to you for the rest of the evening here, but unfortunately we've done our hour, and the show is called Freethought Hour for a reason, because I don't want my victims to think that they're going to get trapped for the next several hours. So I'm going to say it's been a wonderful chat with you. Thank you very much. I hope you'll come on my show again another day. And
I would love to.
Excellent. And thank you also to our small audience of the cream of the crop, obviously. And thank you in the future to all the viewers who will see it as a podcast. And take the rest of the day off.
I'm going to bed now.
Are you? Okay. Well, before you do that, I would, after I've stopped the show, I would like to have a little chat with you when we're not streaming. Would you do that?
Oh, gladly.
Thank you. So
thank you, Frank.
Bye-bye. Yes, thank you, Frank. Bye-bye.
you.